what are we talking about today? What are we jumping into?
We are discussing if you should go to college. You being all of our high school prospective,
all of our listeners,
student audience. Yes, unless their parents are listening and they.
That's true.
Well, I guess they could go to school too.
They
still.
could.
It's never
They
too
definitely
late.
could. No.
It's never too late.
But
But Caleb has a different.
I don't think you should. And it's so weird. And like I was saying, it's weird saying that being in higher ed, like working in higher ed, especially at a liberal arts college. So like, I'm not anti-liberal arts. I'm not anti-college, but I am anti-college if you don't need to go.
So give us some
Meaning like
some details here.
You need to know why you're going. I mean, even if you go and you change your mind while you're there, that's not the end of the world. But I think the end of the world is going to college and you not really knowing why. You just think you should because everyone else does, and that's what culture says you should do.
Right.
Especially if you're going into like the arts field. And then I'll say my caveat. So like if you're going into the arts, you need experience, not education. Education should and usually does, and it isn't synonymous, but give you experience and exposure and connections. That's the purpose of college mainly for everyone, is the connections.
Sure.
But like for healthcare, you need to have the degree in order to get into those job fields. So like a bachelor's is required so that you can get a master's, or a bachelor's is required so you can get your MD, or a bachelor's is required so you can get your master's as like a PA or something. But for like the arts world, unless you're going to be teaching it, you don't really need an education, you just need the experience. So like if you're going to go into like the visual arts, studio arts, acting, you can hear from all of these other people who are professionals in those fields that don't have degrees.
Right.
They just loved it, did it, and taught and learned while they practiced it.
I think your thing would still also apply though to like the education, like people going into education or going into even like some forms of business, like accounting, that kind of stuff. Like it is like science where you do need.
Yeah.
You have to have
can't
the
get
skills.
a job.
Yeah.
Or
yeah.
the certification, licensing, things
There's
like
a
that.
qualification that's required.
Right.
You can't just be naturally good at numbers to be an accountant.
Yeah,
Like,
you need some qualifications, certifications
Although,
and stuff.
I actually do have a friend whose mom is an engineer. She works so she and her husband are both engineers, and they both work at the same company. Her husband went to school, finished school, became a engineer, whatever. She started from the bottom and just started working at an engineering business. She didn't have a degree. I don't think she still has one at all. And worked her way up to the top. So she has no real qualification other than experience in engineering, and she's making almost the same as her husband who has a degree.
What?
But that kind of goes to the people.
Like who you know, not what you know. But also
Well, that
what
and
you
also
know.
just born talent. The idea of educate or intelligence versus
Right.
learning,
Yeah.
being educated in something versus being just naturally really good at something, and
Yeah.
so
Which she had some sort of background. I don't know if she was I think she was self-taught. She just taught herself engineering, used what she learned from high school as far as math and physics and all of that. And then self-taught as she progressed into each next stage in her job. But I mean, it's an interesting thought because no one would recommend that you would do that now. If you want to become an engineer to work, it is very unlikely that you would get hired unless you had that higher intelligence or experience.
Yeah.
That showed that. But that made me think, since we are public health, us in this room, not the podcast, but us in the room, where does public health fall in your argument? Because yes, there are certifications and qualifications. If you have an MPH, you'll get hired by any government organization. If you don't have it, they are not going to hire you. But other than that, getting into nonprofit NGO work, they don't always require that. So should public health aspiring professionals go to college?
Whoa. I feel like with that, is another caveat to it as well, because I've seen with what we've done, excuse me, and working in like the different projects we've done, and then also the ones we've like just worked on separately. I feel like you guys would agree with me on this, maybe, but like.
I'm sorry. Did I have my serious face?
This is why we're not videotaping it. I'm just kidding. But there's a level of like expertise that comes with education, but isn't necessarily inherent to getting the education. So like with like an MPH or a DPH, something like that, you would have this immediate like, okay, they know what they're talking about. That's not necessarily true.
Right.
So because
Right.
they could have it, but somehow still not really
Yeah.
be proficient in it. And when I say proficient, it's just like they're not. It's like public health specifically, but all fields require some type of like flexibility with what goes on, because
Yeah.
each field is constantly changing and shifting for success in the world. Like I follow this person on Instagram who talks to theaters and orchestras about how they need to behave like businesses in order to succeed.
Right.
And so their mindset as an artist has to shift to be more business related in order so that they can keep doing the art. So the same thing for like like I think in healthcare, you can have your degree, but if you're stuck within the rigid confines of the education part and you're not flexible to continue learning, you'll quickly become irrelevant and then unnecessary to the field. So like with like what you're saying in terms of going into public health, like say someone as a physician assistant, I don't think they necessarily need to go get a degree in
Like an
public health,
MPH.
an MPH, if they are bent towards they already understand like disease spread and prevention, because of the fact that they should be educating their patients when they're seeing them. Now obviously they can't do the prevention part because the patient's already in their office,
Right.
but like they can still work towards stuff like that.
I think the important thing in public health is that you need the schooling to bring you to a point of being a well-educated learner. So part of college teaches you how to learn.
Yeah.
Right.
And someone with an MPH, it's not just that they know facts, that is part of what you learn in college, but they also know how to learn. So they know how to read a journal
Yes.
article and understand it. They know how to do research and
Right.
understand their research, do research correctly. And so, just like what you're saying, if someone already has a PA degree, they don't necessarily need to go get an MPH, because that degree has taught them how to learn. And so they can...
Or should have.
Yeah, should
Yeah,
have.
yeah.
So they can learn on their own. Like, they can teach themselves public health or interact with people who are educated in public health and learn from them. But it's a little bit different than what you were saying about the arts, because someone can be really naturally just super good at photography. You can't ever naturally just be super good at understanding disease. No one's just born with that. It's not a talent that you're born
Like there's
with.
information that you have
Yeah.
to.
Yeah,
to
because you have to
gain.
understand the
Yeah.
trends. Like you can't just be
Right.
like, oh, it just makes sense that bacteria would spread this way.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I mean, once you've learned about it, yeah, it does. But then you have to understand like who are the at-risk
Yeah.
populations
Yeah.
and why are they at risk.
And you can be naturally right-brained or left-brained. Like, that is...
Right.
Yeah.
And even, I understand,
Correct.
arts people listening to this might be thinking, well, you do still have to learn information. Like,
Yeah.
how to edit
100%,
or
yeah.
how to...
But that
Color
doesn't
theory.
necessarily
Yeah,
require a higher education, a degree, a
Right.
bachelor's, master's, whatever.
Yeah.
It is a little different. You can definitely be born with more creativity than you can be on the science side. It's a little hard to
I mean,
have
you
that
could-
naturally.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think you could still be more bent towards like understanding it. Like it just
Yeah.
you grasp it better.
It's like the math people. Like
The
if you're
numbers.
naturally inclined to math, to understanding math well, because that's real. Some people just I mean, the
Yeah.
people with high IQs generally are really good math learners or understand it. So if you can understand math well, like that kind of helps you be able to understand like economics and how things flow, how things
Yeah.
change and spread.
Or even if you're just, like, a good memorizer, you're going
Right.
to do better in like a field
Sciences.
that's
Like
heavy
medicine,
on
yeah.
Yeah.
memory.
Yeah.
Or if you're a really like analytical person, you're gonna do well in something like public health if you're a problem solver,
Right.
that type
Right.
of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I also think like there's a place for each of those people in other fields too.
Mm-hmm.
Like if they're someone who's really good with math but also really enjoys design or like art and creativity,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
then they would probably be the most inclined to understand like the Fibonacci sequence and how they can incorporate that into design.
Yeah.
Or like someone who's really
Or even like
creative.
architecture,
Yeah.
because that's super mathy and
Yeah.
design.
Yeah.
Yes,
combined.
yeah.
That's true.
Or if you're really creative in healthcare, like you could. I feel like creatives fit the best in public health.
Yeah.
Personally,
That's
because.
awkward. I'm not very creative.
Well, I'm not. Well, see, that's a,
Yeah, neither am I.
you're like we're the case studies though, because like
Right.
if you don't feel like you're creative, you can still fit in to
Right.
the field. And
Right.
I think of myself as very creative, and I definitely think that this is where my skills can be best
You need
used
both.
in the field. Yeah.
You do need both.
And
yeah.
so in every field, you need like all of the different
Yeah.
varieties of people. So I feel
It's
like
true.
what the point of what I'm saying is like your intentions of getting your education should be based off of like in terms of like going to college. You should be focused on who you're going to be connecting with and why you're connecting with them for where you want to go.
Yeah.
And then God can take that wherever he wants to, but if you're going into college going, I'm going to get an education and therefore that equals a job, that's not the case.
Yeah.
Especially with like, in the past, maybe so, when fewer people were going to college, but now everyone has a bachelor's degree, so it requires like, to work at Walmart, you have to say you have a bachelor's degree. And
Yeah.
it's just like, it's becoming less valuable
Right.
with so many jobs
Right.
and so many people requiring it now.
Yep.
I would just say those who don't necessarily have that desire to go, I think it's important that they do still find
They have a
their
plan.
outlet for how they're going to learn, like where and
yeah.
what way they're
yeah.
going to learn, because we should be lifelong
Learners,
learners.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if that is like trade school, or if that is pursuing maybe your art, or you know, if it's photography or whatever it is, and you think I don't want to get a degree in this, but pursuing that and doing classes in that or something, you know, not specifically college classes,
Or
but
even just like buying textbooks and reading them, like teaching yourself. It can work. You obviously
YouTube.
have to be, and especially now with YouTube.
yeah.
there's
or
so
trying to, like,
many
intern
sources.
with people, trying to make connections yourself.
Right. Which is
But-
harder sometimes.
Yeah.
That's the nice thing about college, university, whatever, is that networking is more accessible sometimes.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes people just say, "Oh, I don't know what I want to do, so I'll just work for a couple of years and wait to go to college." But then they never make progress in figuring out what they want to do.
Right.
They just let themselves do a job that they don't enjoy, and they never take steps to figuring out what that is
Right.
that they want to do. So if you're gonna do that, take a couple gap years, or you're gonna wait to decide if you want to go to school. You should still be doing something to take steps to figuring out what you are passionate about,
No, yeah. I
even
agree
if you're just
completely.
reading or
Yeah.
Yeah,
talking to people.
there was a friend who is a musician who did this thing, and I thought it was really cool, and I was surprised that I'd never heard of anyone doing it before. But I've kind of talked about it too in terms of like something similar with the different high school stuff we've done in terms of like career planning. But he wrote basically like an essay on what he wanted to do in the arts world, like how his music would impact the arts world. And I feel like that's like a great exercise. Like I think journaling in general is like the best thing anyone could do. And then if you can do that in terms of what you're wanting to do, you can take simultaneously like kind of map out where you want to go, and then have like a skills inventory. I'm doing air quotes for those of you who can't see that. Like a skills inventory of like what you're good at, what you love, where that could take you. And then if you can write it out, it'll just kind of allow you to get an idea of what that could be.
Right.
And then you can take a gap year, or you
Yeah.
can do internships, or you can decide what craft you should be learning next. You can have a better idea of like what you should be teaching yourself before you either pursue it further through like more intentional like internships or going to higher ed. I think that would be a great like application step from this conversation is
Right.
if we, them, us all wrote that down and was like, where does God have me in this world, and what should I be doing for Him? And I think that's key to being a Christian.
Yeah.
And
like,
pursuing
what
higher
skills
ed.
has
And
he given you?
yeah, what skills has He given me? Why is He giving them to me? And not being the person who buries them, but the person who intentionally invests them wherever they can. And then the reward just comes from wherever we've invested it, how we've used it. The only thing we are responsible for doing is not using them.
Right. Yep. Yeah. So I think for our listeners, our answer for should you go to college would be yes, no, and or maybe.
Isn't that helpful?
But
You feel
the
helped?
key
You're solving world problems.
is being proactive, being a proactive learner.
Yeah, facts. Lifelong proactive learner.
Yeah.